All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. Got my friend Reid here again from the Cordial Curiosity Street Epistemology channel and also the Street Epistemology channel, and where he basically uses the Socratic method to ask people questions about their beliefs. And we're going to talk about pretty much just kind of learn more about each other's views about specifically truth and epistemology and kind of related subjects. Some of the ones that I talk about a lot that Reid is more interested in learning my views on, and I'm actually more very interested in learning more about your views on them too. So we're going to talk about what is truth, what is knowledge, and also get into whether science is a social construct, and talk about topics like empiricism and perhaps religion and atheism and rationalism and materialism and those sorts of topics. So I guess to start off with, did you want to start off right away with what is truth and approach that question? And you could, if you want, basically give me your rough definition of truth if you want to start off that way.
Sure thing. Yeah. Thanks, Andrew, for having me on. Glad to be here. So what is truth? It's very closely related to knowledge. I think they're pretty much the same thing. It's like there's the map versus the territory, reality being the territory, the ultimate territory, and the map is our truth or knowledge about that territory. So it can be just the set of all maps we have, our best empirical theories. That is our knowledge, our truth.
Okay. So it's a set of our best kind of like, so would you say that truth is kind of like, it sounds like you're maybe describing truth as more like a method in a way?
There are ways to produce these maps.
Okay. Oh, the truth is a map for trying to figure out reality or something like that, or?
Yeah, it's a model of reality.
It's a model of reality. Okay.
And there could be many different models which apply to different parts of reality, but all of these models should have consilience. They should all fit together in some way, and all of them fitting together is our truth, our knowledge.
Oh, okay. So why do they have to all fit together?
Because reality is one thing, and if they don't fit together, if they're in conflict, then that's a sign they're not in line with reality, because reality can't conflict with itself.
Okay, but can they be separate without conflicting with each other? Because I think
Yes.
that the way that I look at this is more like in terms of science, which we were going to get into, like actually, I guess just before that, to talk about truth, I think we probably have pretty similar definitions of truth, although I guess I would have maybe a slightly more simple definition, like something like for what is true, I would say that's just what is what is accurate. So like, is this headphone case white? True statement, whether it's white or whether it's not white. But I think that there are different types of truth depending on the situation. So kind of like there can be different models for reality, like you were saying. There can be different models for reality, but don't necessarily have to conflict with each other. And this, like in terms of science, for example, like one way that my mind has changed about when I used to be more of a fan of like militant atheism, like what Sam Harris talks about and stuff like that, before I learned more from people like Jonathan Haidt, who we've both read, of course, like The Righteous Mind in particular, is that science and religion, they can be separate maps for reality, and they can tell us separate types of truth, even if they seem to conflict with each other without actually conflicting with each other. Like I was getting into the last time we talked on your channel about how I think the more that I thought about it, the more I've actually agreed with what Jordan Peterson's, I think, is ironically actually a postmodern view of truth, which is that there can even be religious truths that are scientifically false. Like, since I've thought about it more, that it reminded me of that conversation that you and I had with my Christian friend Shane and his friend about abortion, in that they view life as beginning at conception. And when people make that argument, that's a scientifically false argument, because if I understand correctly, life actually begins something like 6 weeks after conception, I believe. But it's religiously true to them, even though it's scientifically false. So you're talking about different types of truth when you're having that debate, and they prioritize their religious truth over that, even though it's scientifically false, which is why I think it makes more sense to have different versions of truth, because like if you always agree to prioritize scientific truth, then it's going to be hard to figure out issues like that. And it's also not necessarily the best idea to always prioritize scientific truth. Like, there are lots of decisions that we make in life that are not scientific, or where the truth of it doesn't even matter. Like, what should I have for lunch? What movie should I watch right now? Well, I guess more specific issues of taste like that. Anyway, yeah, sorry to just ramble on a lot there. But yeah, the point of that is that I think there are different types of truth, and that it's not necessarily the best idea to always prioritize one type of truth over other types of truth. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word true. I would say rational, and there's epistemic rationality and instrumental rationality.
Okay.
And the claim, the gun is always loaded. If you can check it 100 times and be epistemically rational that it's not loaded, but it's still instrumentally rational to treat it as it is always loaded. So there's different ways of being rational in different contexts. And
okay. How do those two types of rationality differ from truth?
Yeah, the epistemic is about the truth and the knowledge and having accurate maps of reality. That's where that comes in. Good quality maps of reality are true. We can know things about those maps because of their correspondence with reality.
Okay, so that seems to, with the term you use there, the correspondence of reality, that's also that's one thing I wanted to get into, because that's the correspondence theory of truth, which is a philosophical position on truth, which is different from other positions on truth that people have. And this correspondence theory of truth seems to be the dominant one that people follow in science, but it's not necessarily applicable to our daily life. And there can be things that are true that do not seem to correspond to reality. Like, in terms of science, and specifically empiricism, like I was talking about, if you, like, one way that you can decide that, like for the example I used earlier, that this headphone charger box, it appears white to me and it probably appears white to you too. That's an empirical observation, which is the way that scientists measure results, other than their tools. If we're talking about physics experiments or something like that, a lot of them rely on empiricism, especially if we're talking about the correspondence theory of truth. And it's even scientifically true that we cannot entirely rely on our empirical observations to tell us what corresponds with reality, because our senses evolved to chunk information so we can sense when there's a lion waiting there in the tall grass to pounce on us, so we don't have to observe all the other information, like what else is happening on with the weather, whether I'm hungry or not, without us first reacting to the most imminent danger. So our brain prioritizes information with ignoring relevant, well, I shouldn't say relevant, but ignoring information all day long as part of our daily life. So we can't entirely trust our empirical observations, which is, I think, one problem with the correspondence theory of truth.
Yeah, we'll want to go ahead and share the screen there.
Sure.
You mentioned empiricism, and I think...
Are you able to do that there, or do you want me to do it?
I think you have to pick it down there at the bottom next to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's like some rules for filtering claims to take seriously about reality. And I like these two rules. They come from Jonathan Rauch's Kind of the Inquisitors and his new book, The Constitution of Knowledge. And you mentioned empiricism. And yeah, the empirical rule is about really this principle that no one has personal authority about stuff. Like if you say it's white, well, what does that mean? It's about, you may claim that a statement has been established as knowledge only insofar as the method used to check it gives the same result regardless of the identity of the checker and regardless of the sources of the statement. So if you say something's white, then all of us need to be able to use some way to check that claim where we can all get the same information, like same result.
But there are people who are colorblind who wouldn't be able to tell what color this is or what color this green lighter is, presumably, right?
Yeah, so we need to use some other way to, besides going off people's opinion about it, or else we're going to get into some conflict, irreconcilable conflict. So that's what the empirical rule is about.
Okay. So doesn't that if we're relying on empiricism and other methods, and we have to decide which method to prioritize when depending on what we're doing, and we always need to do that, then doesn't that mean that if the way that you approach truth relies on methods that can be in conflict with each other depending on the situation, doesn't that kind of mean that it's an unreliable way of arriving at truth or gaining knowledge about the world?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Like if we have to use another method, if empiricism doesn't work, if someone tells us what we assume to be the incorrect color of this lighter, like someone sees it as purple or something like that, and we have to rely on other methods to arrive at what is true about this observation, how can we know about what the truth is of what the color is, especially since I'm sure you probably know too that, like, scientifically speaking, colors themselves don't actually exist, and it's just the reflections of light on different places of the light spectrum. So we see colors, but colors themselves are not actually what exists. It's what appears to us. So that's like another way that we can't trust our empirical observations. And what other ways other than empirical observations? I know there are other ways, of course. Which other ways would be better at arriving at truth other than empirical observations in examples like that where empirical observations wouldn't work?
I think they would work because light is a model. We have a model of what light is, and we have ways of checking where a certain point of light is on that spectrum. Like once you get to a certain So there's like visible light and non-visible light, and you get more into like different things. That is all that is a model that we can test empirically and predict things in the future with that model. We can apply that model in reality, and the more accurate and precise we can apply that model, the more we can be confident that it is actually tethered to something real.
Okay. So would you say that empiricism is always reliable then, or would you say that in the examples of colors that we would need other scientific tools to do that, but that those tools would still rely on empirical observations, or that using those tools would not rely on empirical observations?
To make, and another rule related to the empirical rule is the fallibilist rule. Because we can discover empirical facts, some people may be wrong about what the facts mean in the model. So we always want to have our models open to revision from people for criticism. And that relates to the fallibilist rule, where no one gets final say about what the model is. It's always open to criticism. Like you can, and it says you may claim that a statement is established as knowledge only if it can be debunked in principle, and only insofar as it withstands attempts to debunk it. So these models are always open for debunking, and the more models are attempted to be debunked, if they withstand that attempt, then that's also something that we can rely on to think they're more tethered to this reality.
If there's no final say, though, then how do we know that it's true? Like, even if we test something and it comes up with the same result 1,000 times, and we assume, like with what's the word? With scientific skepticism, I guess I should say, that it's always possible that we could come up with a different result, and we always have this model open to being changed. Then how could we say that that's true if we can never say that it's objectively going to be true forever?
Because knowledge doesn't require certainty, we can be confident enough about the model.
Okay. This is maybe where our definitions differ a little bit, because I think that because I can never be 100% sure of anything, and I think probably like you, I evaluate things more like on a scale of probability. Even if I'm 99% sure of something, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's true. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say it's even true that reality actually exists. Like, I know that things like the simulation or things like that are often massively exaggerated, but I mean, physicists don't even necessarily agree about what reality is, or about how the universe came into existence, or things like that. And this is if this is veering off topic, feel free to go back to what I just said there first. But this is like another topic that I wanted to get into also, which is religion, because I think that we're both atheist. But what I notice in your Street Epistemology videos, my favorite videos of yours are the ones you do on your channel and your Street Epistemology channel, where a bunch of you guys analyze conversations with people. It seems to me like you often, especially if you're analyzing like your SE conversations with religious people, you prioritize like scientific and rationalistic and materialist truth over someone's religious views, even if their religious views almost overwhelmingly seem to make their life better. And this is why I think that what is true is not always what is most important. Sometimes happiness and hope and those sorts of things seem more important to me than truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it comes back to, does whatever model they're having, be it religious or whatever, does it violate those two rules, the fallibus rule or the empirical rule? And if it violates that, then we are going to have trouble navigating reality. And if we don't have accurate maps of reality, we're going to end up bumping into it at some point, and that's not going to be good for our well-being and fitness.
How do you know that?
How do I know what?
How do you know that they have to accurately map reality, and if they don't, then we're going to wind up bumping into it, and it's going to be problematic for our well-being?
Yeah, they already do in most of their life. It's just they have a model of where they're going to be after they're dead, and that causes certain actions within this life, and that creates models of other things happening in their life. And if they like, for example, if you have a model of like a God who answers prayers and you get sick or you have cancer or some type of bad disease, and your model of reality is a God can answer prayers, so you pray and then you don't go to the doctor and then you end up dying, and that's not good for your fitness and well-being. And there's more mundane things all in there. It's just, and ideally, if you want to have hope for yourself and your family, I don't want fake hope. I don't want false hope. I want real hope for their well-being. I don't want to lie to myself. I don't want to pretend to know something I don't know. So heaven, in order to be actually valuable, needs to be real, or else I'm just lying to myself.
I don't see the problem with lying to yourself in some context, though. Like in that example, I agree that if you don't go to the doctor because you think that prayers will heal your cancer, I think that's bad because that's negatively impacting your life. But I think that if for the most part, most religious people would still go to the doctor, but they would also pray, and maybe they would get chemotherapy if they got cancer and other treatments, and they would also pray. And if they survived the cancer and they attributed that to praying rather than to chemotherapy, I don't really think that makes much of a difference. And I think, like, in terms of the afterlife, for example, if you and I agree that there's no afterlife, but like my parents both think that there's an afterlife, and we're both motivated to live good lives and we're all motivated to live good lives and make the world a better place or whatnot, I don't think our motivations for that matters if that's all of our goals in life, to try to make the world a better place and be kind to people and that kind of thing.
Potentially. I just think if we want to make wise choices for ourselves individually and collectively as a society, as a species, it's good to have accurate models of reality. If we just stuck to religion, are we going to have models about climate change? Are we going to have models about asteroids coming to like... But
those are different types of truth, though. That's why I said we can prioritize different types of truth. Like, you wouldn't want to try to form a religious theory of climate change, but you might want to form a religious theory of what it means to live a good life and be a happy person.
Yeah, religious theory for that could be potentially adaptive, and I think that's the case for a lot of religions. I just think at this point in the history of humanity, we can also use alternative ways to get that model of a good life.
For sure, yeah.
And ideally, if we can have better, more adaptive, better well-being producing models of the good life for ourselves individually and collectively, we can replace our pre-modern ways of doing that.
Okay. I just think that we don't necessarily need to prioritize what would qualify as better ways of doing that. Like, even though you and I probably have very similar secular approaches to that, I don't think they're necessarily any better than anyone's religious approach, as long as they're like like my parents, who are kind of like, they're religious people, but they live their lives in mostly secular ways. I don't think that their worldview or their motivation is any worse unless they start doing something that negatively affects their well-being, like praying instead of getting chemotherapy, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're just in a transitionary period. Religion is on the decline. This is an empirical question. Like, will societies be better if we completely lose religion, or will we miss it? It's hard,
Well, this is like, tell me what you think about this, because this is one area where I think there is like kind of half a point that Jordan Peterson makes, even though I criticize him often. And I guess Jonathan Haidt, who we're both familiar with, has made a similar point too. Nietzsche's famous quote about the death of God, included in what he writes about that, is the idea that society will start to replace religion with different things. And even though I know you and I disagree about some of the details, I think we both agree that this whole wokeness issue is a massive problem. And some people are really literally seeing this and treating this as their own form of secular religion. So, and like I said, I don't entirely agree with this conclusion, but it does to me put some merit into the point that it's that if you get rid of religions, they're going to be replaced by these secular religions that are in some cases even more dangerous. Now, I don't agree with people who say that this means that getting rid of religion is dangerous and we need to have religious societies. But I think there is a point to the argument that if you get rid of religion and try to make society fully secular, then it can result in this sort of like wokeness religion.
Yeah, I don't think secularism is sufficient. I think it's necessary, but I think we want wise societies. That's the sufficiency. And religion has a lot of evolved wisdom built into it. I don't think the attribution of what made it wise is because of what they think it is. It's other evolutionary adaptations for acting in the world. So what is wise to do? I think we can find that out rationally. There's rationally again. So let's just figure that out.
Yeah.
We're educating people about it.
Yeah, let's get more into rationalism, because this is another thing where similar to scientific truth, for example, I don't think that's always the best way to approach things, and especially if you're talking about in terms of emotional things like relationships with people, whether they're platonic relationships or romantic relationships or any other kind. I think that in most of those real life situations, when you're just talking about psychology and, well, just our psychological and direct interactions with people, I think rationalism has very little to nothing to do with that. And then also, you also know from having read Jonathan Haidt's work too, that most of what we think is our rational thinking is just us rationalizing our intuitions, and we form these intuitions and then we rationalize forward from those. So we're not really capable of thinking that rationally anyway. Now, that doesn't mean that I think we should just go around and be run totally by our emotions, but I think that rationalism has much harder limits than the way that it seems to be depicted by people who are like huge advocates of rationalism, like Sam Harris or other people who have similar worldviews.
Yeah, it's not like we can be completely rational, disconnected from our emotions. That's always going to be there. There's just this spectrum of like, we can get a little bit better once we learn how to think a little bit better, think through problems, think through ideas and claims, and evaluate them ideally with other people who disagree with us. And once we get a bunch of people together who can disconfirm each other, knowledge can evolve out of that process as well.
Okay. Also, this this is kind of similar. like you mentioned, the more people look at things, this is reminding me earlier of how you can't necessarily rely on one person's perception of things. So you have to kind of like survey a lot of different people and see how much of our perceptions agree with each other. They're like, sometimes it can be the case that obviously there's a borderline consensus, even scientific consensus about one thing, and then we can find out that years later we were totally wrong. Like the last time you and Dusty and I talked, I mentioned that, you know, obviously people used to think that the universe or the Earth was the center of the universe, of course, and almost everyone agreed with that. And then gradually we learned that we were wrong, and obviously this could keep happening time and time again. So we could, in theory, be totally wrong about most of what we have seeming consensus of now. So I think it is a good idea to, for more scientific issues like climate change, you mentioned, for example, to pursue scientific truth over other types of truth in that situation. But I also think that you can't necessarily rely on even a scientific consensus opinion of something. So I feel more skeptical of that sort of thing than normal. Not climate change specifically, but just as like the idea of mass agreement about something too. Like, even if you're not talking about a directly scientific thing, like most people would agree that 2 + 2 = 4. Well, if someone agrees that 2 + 2 = 5, I don't see how that's really that much of a problem, unless you're thinking, I don't know, I bought 5 coffees instead of 4 or something like that. So sorry, I kind of rambled on for a while there again, but yeah, I just was commenting on like the proportion of people who believe in something, how much we can rely on that to tell us what is true.
Yeah, science goes through paradigm shifts. That happens. Our models can be very conciliant and have a lot of parsimony, but at some point, if we get enough of accumulating facts that don't fit the model, if enough that happens, we might need to have a whole paradigm shift, and that's fine. That's just part of the process. You know, no one gets final say. So that's just helps get us to more accurate models. With it, if it takes a different paradigm, so be it.
Okay. Now, with rationalism and with rationalism, for example, like, how do we know? Like, I agree that at least to an extent, it's good to try to be more rational. But I also think that it's good to try to be more emotional too. Like sometimes our disagreements with people because we're not sympathetic about their emotions enough, and we can't see that they're seeing issues from totally different angles that we are. And I've had this problem myself before too, by like basically acting too rational and disregarding the importance of people's emotions, even if their emotions seem totally irrational.
Yeah. Emotions are a natural phenomenon. When we have a model of what emotions are and where they come from and what they're used for, and curiosity is a great emotion to cultivate. And, you know, emotions have purposes. So feel free to use them for their purpose wisely. That's fine. But we don't want to be just being emotional for the sake of being emotional in all contexts. There are certain emotions that are to be useful in certain contexts.
That's interesting too. That could get us more into science, and like we talked about, whether science is a social construct, because like in terms of emotions, I don't think you can, and you didn't say this directly, but I'm not sure I don't think you can understand emotions scientifically completely. Like I think if you look at love and you think of it as an evolutionary adaptive way through serotonin for mothers to form bonds with their children and fathers to form bonds with them and that sort of thing too, I don't think that entirely explains love, and it doesn't explain like why you fall in love with whoever you love with. I don't think you can scientifically answer, especially that last part at all. And for like in some types of things like that, like I don't even know if that last part, like figuring out why someone falls in love with someone, is even a useful science to, or useful question rather, to apply science to. So I'll stop there though before I get into specifically science as a social construct.
Yeah. I think love is a part of that evolutionary model of what humans can, experience. If an alien anthropologist arrived and they didn't have any sense of love, I don't know how that would work, but anyway, they could be able to model what humans think and feel, and love would be a part of that. And they could have a model that could predict certain things, and I think that would make sense to me. But yeah, there is that, it's different from experiencing love itself and knowing it that way versus having a model of what it functions as. Those are different things.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I watched that video you sent me from King Crocoduck about science as a social construct. So I guess first off with that, I'd like to get your definition of a social construct, because I see science as a social construct, but I think that might be, again, perhaps similar to earlier, related to how we might have different definitions of it.
Yeah. Like social constructs are a concept created by society, created by humans, their ideas. They can be models themselves, or they can be just mere concepts, a word describing some phenomenon in reality. And science itself, there's like a soft version of social construction and a hard version. There's like, if you can describe it in language, that's a social construct in the soft way. But the hard way, the more extreme way, is like the concept itself, the social construction, was created by society in a way that was like structurally determined to be that way. And the values of the group that created that social construction are embedded in that concept, in that social construction, by nature of it. Like,
okay. I would say, I was gonna say at first that I think I probably agree with more of the soft social constructionism, but I do agree with like the idea that the values are baked into whatever the social construction is that we're talking about. But I would disagree with terms like deterministic and inherently in their nature, because that's too much of an ironically like certain scientific sounding way of describing that.
Yeah, there's like structural determinism. Is that a postmodern thing, or
I don't think any type of determinism is a postmodern thing, really, because postmodernism is more anti-essentialist.
Yeah, there's like the power knowledge idea, where knowledge itself is connected to power, and that's related to the values in some way. It's like whatever we claim to be knowledge are social constructions, and those were determined by some kind of system, or like the system is related to that in some way.
Okay. I wouldn't say they're determined by that system, but I would agree with all of that, including that they're related to the system in some way.
Yeah, it's like the knowledge is political by nature. Like that's the claim.
I wouldn't say it's political by nature. I would say it's ideological, just in the sense that everyone has an ideology.
Mm-hmm. Like there's values embedded in it. Another way of saying it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, want to go back to the screen to like map out that relationship?
Yeah.
Yeah. The King Crocodile video described the relationship in this way. I think it's a lot of people claim science, philosophy is the foundation of science. You can't do science without philosophy. So, and if philosophy is a bunch of
like the correspondence theory of truth, like I mentioned.
Yeah, if that's like if all of philosophy is a social construct, it's just ideas we made up, then science itself is a social construct. Is that the argument?
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, King Crocodile talked about how science itself is different. It's the methodology, it's the way of evaluating and developing models, those models that we're using to navigate reality. And that methodology is not based on philosophy itself. It's its own thing.
It sounds like a philosophy in itself, the way you're describing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've also mapped out that argument over here. There's like two reasons to think science is a social construct. He went over. One is the philosophy is the foundation of science reason, and another is like science is based on values. That reason, and all values are social constructs. And yeah, this is all King Crocodile's argument. So it goes to he goes into how the values of science come from nature. That's his claim, and that nature is not a social construct. So if that was true, that if the values of science come from nature, that would not mean that all values are social constructs. And that
why?
And that the
I don't remember what he said specifically about that.
Why what?
Why would that mean that what you said about nature? Like this I don't like this idea of nature too, because that does seem like a social construct to me, because there's this idea that we defined as nature, and you can look at it in a lot of different ways, and there are different types of nature too, like in terms of human nature, what that has been defined as has changed innumerable ways throughout history. And this term nature, it seems kind of amorphous and ambiguous to me.
Yeah, this gets down to our fundamental assumptions that reality is a thing out there and it exists. And that is nature. Like nature and reality are the same thing.
Because you would you say that there is a reality that exists independent of human observations?
Yeah, the thing that when we stop believing in it doesn't go away.
Okay. Well, I would say that I wouldn't say that we create reality or anything like that, but I would say that reality and our observations of it are inexorably connected, because we determine what is real through our observations of reality. And if we were not here to observe reality, there would be no way for us to know whether reality is actually real or not, because we would not be able to observe it. So the belief that reality is real relies on our observations of it.
Mm-hmm. We have a model again of reality of the solar system, of how we got here from the Big Bang through the developments of planets, through the evolution of life. Life didn't exist for like billions of years. This is part of our model. And we just have this model of this thing, nature, like the natural world, like our universe. We can go with that. The universe exists, and we can know some things about it.
Okay.
So his claim is that the values of science come from this universe, from evolution.
Okay. I don't see how there's evidence of that.
Yeah, he keeps going. So he says science is an evolved cognitive process. It's an adaptation. And that his reason for that is that all organisms model their environment, and all organisms use the big four operational criteria of science to model their environment.
Right. What were those big four criteria again for people watching?
Right here. This is the properties of a model that science uses. These four criteria the more you can be in line with these criteria, the better the model it is. And here's your, accuracy and precision, the parsimony, like the individual model needs to be, connected to the facts in a good way, like, and make the least assumptions, Occam's razor, and it needs to fit in with other models, the consilience there, the accountability, like you want to be able to not be too rigid when you encounter new facts, like you can't take in any facts. That's not a good model. And not too flexible. Like you want to have it not ignore all new facts. You want it to be optimally flexible and rationally coherent. You don't want it to be internally contradictory. That's not a good model.
So why do these things make a model good?
Because of their practical application. When the model's put in use in reality, it gives you the best practical use.
How so?
If you when you apply it in reality, you have high predictive accuracy and high precision. So it's like hitting a target. You want to hit the bullseye, all of your attempts in the middle. Like that's highly accurate and highly precise. You don't want it to be all over, and randomly, or just highly precise in the wrong place.
Okay. What about studies in social science that have shown that experts in particular fields are actually even worse at making predictions than non-experts?
Well, that's a property of individual human beings, and individual human beings are not the best. It's this public knowledge of the model that is developed. It's like no individual human being owns the model. It's a separate thing.
Well, this way it sounds like you're describing a social construct. Because we have to rely on many people's opinions, and they're constantly changing, and we're correcting each other's observations. Like that's basically a social construct.
Well, these are values which influence the quality of a model. And these values seem to have been put into our brains because they are an evolved cognitive process. Like we can't not use them because they're part of our nature. And all organisms use them. even single-celled organisms.
Didn't we arrive at these conclusions through a collection of our observations that all of us have corrected about each other throughout times, and these models have changed? Like, that sounds like a social construct to me.
Our model of this model is a social construct, but the values themselves influence the model. Let me go back to the argument.
You want me to add that there again?
Sure. So he says, all organisms use the big four operational criteria of science to model their environment. His reasons for that is because, yes, single-celled organisms use the big four, and single-celled organisms are the ancestors of all life. Like, you can see a slime mold you saw in the video. It can model its reality and navigate to food, but it has no, like, brain. It's just...
This reminds me of like one thought that I had when I was watching the video, like towards the end, like I think maybe around the part you were talking about, is that it seemed like he was saying that humans just living and being, or any living organism living and going throughout life is science. Like living your life and doing your daily activities is science.
It's like a low quality version of the big four model. Like, you can do that yourself, create models of reality. You have no choice but to make models of reality using these four criteria. That's just how you work.
That sounds like positivism to me, which is a philosophy, which is like a religious devotion to science, as if science can solve all problems and we're all inevitably behaving the same way based on these four criteria all the time. Like, I think, like, obviously extraordinary claims require an extraordinary amount of evidence. Is there like an enormous mountain of evidence to show that all living organisms operate based off of these four criteria all the time, inevitably?
Yeah, that's where my argument, he goes into that more, but that's where my knowledge of the argument runs out, and he has more.
Okay.
The field to look into about this is evolutionary epistemology, and that would have more of the evidence for that. I'd have to look into that more. I haven't studied it.
That's philosophy.
Well,
epistemology itself is philosophy.
Well, the values of that, philosophy and science go together. Go back.
Okay.
Like
it sounds like you're saying science is a philosophy, because I agree that it is.
Science is the methodology of developing those models, and philosophy can refine those models through ontology and epistemology. But the methodology itself is a separate thing, and that came first. That's the claim.
The scientific method came before we decided what the method is?
Yep, it's an adaptation from evolution.
I don't agree with that. I think that was socially constructed because we decided that this was the scientific method. Like, it seems like you would have to say that the scientific method existed before we thought that it existed, and we actually discovered it. We didn't come up with it ourselves. I don't see how that's possible.
The scientific method is a little different from the criteria of the big four of the scientific models. Those criteria...
You want me to show that there?
Those criteria have been selected from evolution. Like if someone...
Big four.
Yeah, if someone comes across, a rattlesnake in the middle of the forest, you want to have an accurate model of what that snake is and where to step. You want to be, have accurate and precise place to be. And your model of that snake needs to be parsimonious with other facts. It needs to be accountable to other evidence, and it needs to be rationally coherent. You don't want to think you need to step right or step left at the same time. You need this way of modeling reality is what all organisms use. It's the most.
It sounds like it sounds like you're just making an argument that evolution happens, though. Like to me that just proves that people like organisms evolve. To me, that doesn't prove that science is evolved. I don't see how science is an evolved based on like the fact that humans evolved and seem to be adaptive. Like I was saying earlier, like it can be adaptive to not necessarily make any decision that has anything to do with science whatsoever, like to run from that lion that's hiding in the grass about to pounce out and try to kill you.
That doesn't have anything to do with science, of having an accurate model of reality. Is the tiger dangerous?
Well, I was saying that your brain, that's evidence of how, and this is the way that I think Jonathan Haidt describes it in one of his books, if not another author, that like I was talking about how we chunk information and we're not thinking rationally at all when we run from the tiger. We're thinking instinctively, intuitively, like I was talking before. It's not a rational decision to run from the lion. It's an instinctive behavior. It doesn't have to do with conscious rational thinking or anything like that. It doesn't have to do with science. It has to do with instincts.
Yeah, instincts can be an evolved cognitive process.
Yeah, so like that's evolution. Like, are you saying that evolution itself is also science? Because I think those are different things.
The evolution produced in organisms the ability to model the reality so they can respond to the reality, the environment effectively, so they could effectively survive and reproduce and, go that way. So organisms that are adaptive because they can model their environment well. And the best way to model the environment is to have models that correspond to these 4 criteria. The best models comply with these criteria.
I still don't see how this is science. I think like what you're describing just sounds like evolution, and applying this to science, especially the way that King Crocoduck does in his video, is a pure example of social construction to me, by deciding that this qualifies as science.
These are the values that we're using to create scientific models, like highly complex, more highly complex models, which we use to not individually model environments ourselves individually, but model more complex phenomenon, like anything, like relativity or whatever. These are the values we've used to measure the quality of a model. And in his claim is that these values were put in us from evolution.
That sounds like a faith claim. That sounds like you're making the Sam Harris type of argument that we can have scientific values, which I think is a faith claim. I don't see how that's possible.
Yeah, in the video he says he's not making an ought from an is. He's just saying these values are just what we're using to make our models.
Isn't that saying that we have evolved scientific values?
I guess.
Yeah, like that seems like a total social construct to me. Like we evolve scientific values. Like it seems like this argument is reliant on on what we decided that these values are after they evolved into us. So we could have decided that these values are scientific regardless of what our values happen to be. If we had evolved in totally different ways, we could say that those are scientifically adaptive in the same way, even if the values are totally different and those big four criteria are totally nothing to do with that whatsoever. Like, we could think that irrationality is an important aspect of science if we had evolved in a different way. So I don't think that having evolved this way means that the values are inherently scientific.
Yeah, he's saying the products of whatever they are, the products of evolution by natural selection are natural. And if those criteria were produced by evolution, then they're not produced by society.
Maybe this is a fundamental difference too, because I think that evolution and society are inexorably connected too, because we're not just talking about individual evolution, like Jonathan Haidt, for example, again talks about group selection, which is his argument for group selection is one of the reasons why I'm no longer a militant atheist anymore, and I don't have a problem with people being religion, because it seems like in actually kind of a similar way to what you're saying, that religion evolved through the cultural evolution of group selection as adaptive for keeping societies together and allowing them to function better. So so I don't see how you could apply that argument to science specifically without saying that you're looking at science in a similar way to the way that people look at religion.
Culture is a natural phenomenon, and it still reduces down to the selfish genes. Like, culture serves those through the individual organism, which was produced through natural selection. So, and if we, as individuals, being a natural organism, we are a product of evolution, and we can model our environments because we evolved that way. Our models have been adaptive, the way we model reality is from organisms that best, survived. And the way to best to survive is to have high quality models that are applicable, that are efficient, that are accountable to data, and that are internally consistent. Those models are the most adaptive. Do we need an argument for that? Do we question that?
Well, I don't know, because it seems like in the case of Jonathan Haidt's argument, for example, that religion is more adaptive than science in some ways. And if you think that that what is best is what is the most adaptive, then you could say that religion is more adaptive than science, which would, if you're looking at that as science, then it seems like almost classifying religion as science.
Yeah, Haidt's definition of science is different from what King Crocoduck's definition is.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying they're the same, but that's why I'm saying that.
Yeah. What is Haidt's definition is just, it wouldn't apply to this argument, I don't think. It's more broad. This is a different conception of what science is. It's the ability to create models, and we can create higher quality models with these criteria. That's what science is.
Okay. So what are the similarities and differences between that and King Crocoduck's definition of science, and which one do you agree with more?
I'm not sure what Haidt's definition of science was. I think it's like the Scientism-ish definition of science. that if we just followed science, the world would be a better place. That type of claim. And I don't know what he means by science. I think he means scientism, and that's a different thing. I think,
yeah, of course.
If we developed high quality models of reality, we'll be able to better efficiently navigate reality. And in order to live a good life, we're living in reality. So to make wise choices, we need to be able to know where to go and how to navigate reality.
But some of that, a large portion of our well-being, I would say, doesn't have to cohere with reality, since we know that religion still has some value for bonding societies together, and a lot of tenets of religion do not cohere with reality, like some of the examples we mentioned, like there being life after death as far as we know, or like life beginning at conception, or like that you can cure your cancer with prayer. Some of those things do lead to harm, of course, but some of them are ones that cohere with reality, that don't cause any harm in real life for the most part. Like like we talked about before, if you're motivated to be a good person because you think you'll be rewarded when you die, rather than just being a good person because you think it's good to live the best life you can, and this is the only life you have, and you want to make the world a better place for people, I don't think that makes much of a difference. So whether your model coheres with reality is only important depending on what situation you're talking about. And in some situations, it's not a good idea to prioritize a model that coheres with reality.
I don't know. Like, God as an idea pretends to model reality, but it's people.
It depends on what type of God you're talking about. Like, there's a lot of different ways of looking at God.
Yeah. God allows you to have a bunch of made up models of reality, like where we came from, where we're going, what is the way to have a good life, and a way to get meaning and happiness, and hope and purpose. God serves as a way to meet these psychosocial needs. And I think there are better ways to do that besides literally believing in the deity. Like, I think that's a good way to conceptualize the idea of God. Have you read Everybody's Wrong About God by James Lindsay?
No, I haven't read that one. I've heard of it, though.
Yeah, he has a great conception, or just argument, that we shouldn't be thinking of God in terms of theism, of the philosophy of religion, of theism, but more towards psychology and sociology, and what the idea of God does for human beings. And it seemed like one answer to that question is, what does God do for us? It's like, it allows us to meet our psychological and social needs. That's what it does for humans. And there are better and worse ways of meeting those needs, and we can figure that out. That would be better.
Or do you mean like better than religion?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't see what makes them better.
It depends on what we're using. Like, for example, morality. We don't want to ground morality in the nature of God, and we could just do anything and claim God wanted us to do it. We can use liberal science, not science itself, but liberal science, to criticize moral values, and just have that knowledge evolve through criticism, and we can be confident about morality that way. There are different ways of getting meaning and hope and purpose.
What about like wokeness, for example, which is kind of like a secular religion? Would you say that that's better than a religious worldview, especially if we're talking about like a, I don't know, like a liberal Christian view, like something like what my parents have, like what I talked about, wouldn't their type of religious worldview, which a lot of people I know adhere to, be better than kind of like the wokeness worldview?
I would much rather have a benign form of Christianity than wokeness, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So
it stood the test of time.
So if a religious worldview can be better than a secular worldview, then I don't see how it's true or it even matters that we can have better ways to approach or how we interact with the world than a religious worldview.
Yeah, I don't think wokeness is secular or like liberal in the terms of like it follows those rules for reality I gave, like the fallibilist.
I definitely
rule.
wouldn't say it's liberal.
Yeah, it doesn't follow those rules of the fallibilist rule and the empirical rule. It violates both of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it claims it has the final say, and it claims people have personal authority about certain claims based on their lived experience. It violates both of them. So,
but aren't there advocates of science who make those same sorts of claims? Maybe. Like
then not doing science.
Like with the whole vaccines issue, for example, I personally got vaccinated, but I am annoyed at people who are like demonizing people who don't get vaccinated, and like Fauci, for example, going on TV saying, "I am science, and if you disagree with me, you disagree with science." This sort of thing is just fuel for anti-science people who are coming up with all of these conspiracy theories about vaccines. This is scientism, like what we talked about, like how science can become a religion.
Yeah, don't confuse the institutions surrounding the development of high quality models of reality with that itself. It's like Fauci is the head of an institution, and their institutions aid in these creations of these models, but that's not science itself. That's not the core of science. That's another part of the video.
Okay, would you say that science is more like the scientific method, or there's a distinction between the institution of science and the scientific method, and we should trust the scientific method more than the institutions of science?
Yeah, we should trust the high quality models as judged by those 4 criteria. And
okay.
The ways to get those models is by testing hypotheses.
So someone could be following the scientific method totally outside of the realm of scientific institutions, and they could still be producing better quality results because they're following those models more so than the people within scientific institutions. So like the most extreme example could be someone without any credentials whatsoever who comes up with like a 10 times better vaccine than anyone else has come up with, but it was produced completely outside of the scientific institution.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think
as long as this model can be applied, if he has a model for what the vaccine can do, just apply that model by testing the vaccine in reality.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, but one thing we could almost certainly agree on is that if you look at science as the scientific method, I definitely think the scientific method is a good thing, regardless about whether we agree about science, whether science is a social construct or how often you should prioritize it over other types of things. Yeah, I think we can almost certainly agree about that.
Yeah, and even if it is ultimately a social construct, a kind of power game, I think it's the best power game in town because it minimizes conflict because of how it channels conflict. It leaves it open to criticism from anybody, and it doesn't, require anybody to have a personal authority. So it purposely leaves it open for criticism, so it can evolve over time.
How would you say, this is kind of different from what we were going to talk about, but how would you say problems like associated with when people disobey sort of things like that can be avoided? Like I said, like someone like Fauci acting like everything he says is science, and someone acting like they are the one scientific authority on an issue, which can discourage people from science as a whole and make them go way too extreme in the other direction.
I think there's like a great Feynman quote, like science is the decentralized activity or something like that, about the skepticism of experts. It's like, it's the entire opposite of that. It's like, we're not putting our faith in experts. We don't trust experts. We trust the models and what the models can do, how they can be applied. Like, experts are just ambassadors for models. If you can't explain, and ideally you need to be able to explain the model in simple terms, or else you don't know it, really.
Okay.
It's another thing.
Yeah. That's complicated too, because we obviously, like science itself, it's hard for people to be scientifically. Oh, that's an interesting comment that this guy made. I got distracted by that. Atheists are dedicated and curious to find ways to deny God's existence. I think that depends on what type of atheist you are. I wouldn't say I'm dedicated to that. I would say I'm more of the position of the pragmatist atheist philosopher Richard Rorty, which is, when asked the question of whether gods exist, my opinion more now is more like, I don't care. Whether God exists or not has no effect on my life.
Another good quote is, science is the belief in the ignorance of experts.
If science is defined that way, I would totally agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was saying, like, it's hard to even be like scientifically literate too. Like, I had to look into the research a little more before I was learning about, for example, that whole thing about vaccines and people like Brett Weinstein talking about ivermectin and that sort of thing, for example, and how people don't seem to look into whether there has been more than one study done on something, whether that study's been replicated, what methods were used, what else someone was taking other than ivermectin in a study, whether studies have been retracted, and all that sort of stuff. And obviously that's a lot of stuff to look into, so it can be easy for people to just cherry pick whatever scientist agrees with them the most, and then they act like that's the scientific truth, and then these other experts are not saying the scientific truth.
Yeah, I enjoyed Brett and Heather's analysis of those studies. They were trying to evaluate the models that the studies described. What did their study even have a hypothesis at all? What was their hypothesis? And that's what it's all about, evaluating that model.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it can be so complicated that way. Another thing we could get into a little bit would be materialism, because well, I guess first of all, I'm curious, would you define yourself as a materialist, and if so, why, and what do you define as materialism?
I think I've looked up the definition. Like, I don't use that word. It's mostly like a theism, criticism of atheist type word, which is like the belief that, the material, matter and energy are the only thing that exists, and like, that's all in the universe, or all of reality.
If you're an eliminative materialist, yeah, there are different types of materialists, but yeah, that's the most extreme version.
Yeah, I'll just go with whatever our best empirical theories are about the nature of reality, and if we develop models which include non-material stuff, as long as the model of the, as long as that stuff can be tested using models that correspond to the big four, that's fine with me. But I don't think we have any models which use any of those hypotheses.
Yeah, like could we materially examine a model that's meant to examine non-materialist things? Like, I don't see how possible that would be. Like, I would say though that I'm way less of a materialist than I used to be. Like, I think this is why I make a distinction between belief claims and knowledge claims. Like, I don't believe that any gods exist, but I don't actually know whether any gods exist or not, because I don't have I can't possibly examine the knowledge about that. And I just think that oh crap, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah. Oh yeah, in materialism, so I think that's it's possible that non-materialist things exist. Like, I'm more open to that possibility than I used to be. But what I trust what I'm empirically observing at the same time too. I just think that, materialist or empirical observations about reality are not necessarily even the most important aspects of reality, perhaps. Like, I really don't know.
Yeah, like I can, what is it? Dark energy, is that material? Like, we have
models, that's a good question.
We have models of that and how it affects our material reality. Like, we can have models of stuff like that, but I'm not a physicist, so maybe it doesn't apply. But
yeah,
if a God exists and it affects the world, we should be able to model its effects and if you can't have any models which make any accurate and precise predictions, I have no value of that model.
But most people's definition of God is non-material, though, like metaphysical. So, like, this is an instance where I think that if you can't test it physically, I don't necessarily think that that's a knockdown argument like I used to be, because we're prioritizing material existence. And again, if someone believes in a non-material God that they have no physical evidence for, or I mean, if they believe in a metaphysical God that they have no physical evidence for, I don't think that's a problem at all, as long as they don't do the thing you said, like pray to cure their cancer instead of getting chemotherapy for it.
Yeah, like, I don't need direct physical evidence of it. I just need a model which includes it in the model. Like, I know a model which includes God in that model. It can be indirect effects, potentially. So, yeah.
Indirect effects could be, like, a lot of people could say a lot of different things for direct effects, like, oh, there's this face in my pancakes, that's indirect proof of God, or something like that, right?
Yeah, we have alternative natural hypotheses for what causes faces in pancakes.
Yeah. This guy posted a few things in the comments that I think are interesting. What caused our existence if not God? I think you should answer that one, because I think you can probably give a better answer.
Our best empirical theories explain a lot of that, and so far any gaps in our knowledge has not been filled by God. So I'm not going to go with the track record of that hypothesis. I'm going to just be agnostic about any gaps. I don't know where our universe came from, but I know where Earth came from based on our best empirical theories of that, and I know where life came from. I know where life evolved from, and we have natural hypotheses for the origin of it. That doesn't require a God, so I'm not going to use God of the gaps for that.
Yeah, like Neil deGrasse Tyson says, the God of the gaps argument gets exceedingly smaller, and but I mostly agree with that. Like, I don't think that we came from God, because there is there is more evidence for alternative theories that we came from God. And also, when people say God, they mean a lot of different things, as I mentioned earlier, and what you define as God could be true or false depending on how you define it. Like, one thing that has annoyed me many times about my friend Shane I mentioned before is that he's like insisted, no, you do believe in God. And then when I get down to what he defines as God, he basically seems to mean evolution. Well, yeah, if you define God as evolution, but I don't need the word God for that. It's just evolution. And so like, and like, what God do you think created the universe? Well, it's probably the God in the religion that you belong to. And how come other people think that there's just as much evidence that their God is the one that created the universe? Like, I'm fine with going what has the most evidence behind it, but thinking that it's entirely possible that I could be wrong in any way.
Yep.
Also, that guy keeps spamming the comments, but he has something about is your mind not physical or physical? What is the evidence for that? This is a way that my mind has changed a little bit recently. Well, I guess in more recent years, I should say, because, like I said, I used to be like an eliminative materialist, like all that exists is all that is physical. But in terms of consciousness, I agree. I kind of don't really agree with any of the main three theories of consciousness. Like, there's dualism, that there's a physical mind and there's some sort of non-physical mind, and there's a division between physical and non-metaphysical, or physical and non-physical things in the universe. And then there's only materialism. The only things that exist are physical. And then idealism, the only things that exist are non-physical. And then some of this gets into like free will and determinism too, whether everything is all determined and whether we have free will or not. And I think, and then there's compatibilism too, where, in terms of free will, which seems like a paradox, where things are determined, but we still have free will, kind of. Like, I think there are flaws. I think there are really fundamental flaws in all of these arguments. So I'm really not sure. Like, this is another reason why I'm less of a materialist than I used to be. But I also think that, like, idealism, the complete opposite of materialism in some way, makes just as little sense. It's just it's very confusing and interesting to me.
Yeah, reality itself is magical enough for me. So it's like there's a lot of great things about reality and life being one, and I see no reason why consciousness couldn't be a product of physical processes. I'm open to other hypotheses, but try to test them. So, and if you can test them using these models, that would be a great thing to see.
Yeah. Well, that gets into too, like, similar to God, if the mind is distinct from the brain, and the mind is non-physical, and a materialist or a physicalist would say that it's that consciousness and the mind are only physical, like they're basically the brain. I don't see how you could prove or disprove whether that's the case, or whether the mind is actually something non-physical that's separate from the brain, because if it's non-physical, then you inherently can't prove it physically, similarly to what I was saying about God. If you can't, like, physically prove something metaphysical. So that's why I'm less certain about that than I used to be too. But I'm more ambiguous about that than I am about the existence of God, because the concept of a God seems like a way bigger claim than that the mind is non-physical to me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how we could test that. but I'm open to it.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible that non-physical things could be tested in non-physical ways, and we could attain non-physical evidence for a non-physical mind and a metaphysical God that we could empirically observe?
If we can't do that, then it has no pragmatic use or value. So I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. Yeah. It's hard to, I wonder about that sort of thing sometimes, but usually when I get super baked and go on these endless rabbit holes in my thoughts. So yeah, were there any other aspects of these topics or something similar that you wanted to discuss?
I think we covered a lot.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for talking with me, man. This was interesting, and I'm glad that, like I expected, as usually happens when I have open-minded conversations with people who are just trying to learn more about each other's views, like I try to do, that seems like I understand your views a little better, and hopefully you understand mine more too. And we pretty much mostly disagree and mostly agree rather, and have similar priorities. So thanks a lot for talking, and thanks a lot everyone for watching. Next one coming up this weekend, I believe I'm probably going to be either doing, I'm probably going to be talking about Dune Messiah with friends Dusty and Parker, or if not, we're going to do another politics and culture chat on the Facebook metaverse and Barry Weiss's IDW University of Austin. So either of those will be interesting. So look forward to that, and check out Reid's channel, of course, too, Cordial Curiosity, and check out also the Street Epistemology channel, where and on your channel you post street epistemology discussions with people, and then on that channel, I think maybe mostly also on the Street Epistemology channel, you do the analyses with other street epistemology people of conversations. I find those really interesting, like I said. And thanks everyone. Please subscribe, click that like button, click the bell to be notified when I come out with other videos. Check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description as always. And like I always say, I love you all, keeping the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And have interesting conversations with people about disagreements that you have. Very good idea. All right. And anything else you want to say before we end it there, Reid?
That's great. That summed it up. Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, man. And thanks a lot, everyone. And adios until